against him. He was playing Zoo, and he's kind of done a 180 here and is now playing a blue deck, Miracles. Perhaps the exact opposite end of the spectrum from Zoo.
It's a good deck. I think that's why he's playing it. Both these players sitting here at 3-1. Todd, number 28 on our Season 3 leaderboard here. So he's got 1 bye heading into the Invitational, I believe. I don't know if he has 2 byes from last year. So either way, let's see with the Red Splash here. I want to see if he's like on the Joe Lissette build here or if he's on the Schoenegger build. I know Philip likes Ponders in the main deck. That's what Raucus won with 2 weeks ago in Syracuse, but I don't see any Ponders in the main, so looks like Joe's build.
Yeah, main deck Pyroblast, main deck Red Elemental Blast. That kind of gives that away.
Yeah, the cheaty miracles is what Joe likes to call it. As we are underway here with a Sensei's Divining top. And Dan did mulligan down to 6. Now let me ask you a question right off the bat as we begin our legacy coverage today. Todd's going to fire off a Ponder, and we'll see what he does with that. But Todd had Force of Will plus blue card that he could have used on the top.
Yeah.
Would you count that?
That's the big question, right? Dan's on a mulligan. It's very possible that he needs that top. And plus, if Todd forces the top, that kind of shuts off any further counterbalances down the line, right? But it is so hard pulling the trigger on this card that just sits in play and controls card quality rather than, you know, Force of Will, a spell that actually matters. But the thing is that the top actually does matter, and that is a very Force of Willable spell. And I think people have finally come around to that. But, you know, I know that Todd knows that the top is probably their best card, but it is still just very hard to pull the trigger on that sometimes.
I am currently of the opinion, I've watched Miracles a lot over the past year, that I think you're supposed to have the fight over the top.
I'm pretty sure you are too, but so many things can go wrong. Like, they could just have a second top, for example, and it's just like, oh God, what have I done?
It's bad then. It's
bad.
Definitely bad then. But I think top is the engine that makes the car go.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say too, is like, the deck when you have top versus the deck when you don't have top is just a completely different animal.
It's a brainstorm here for Todd on the end of turn, so I imagine we'll see a perfect brainstorm. He will put 2 cards back and then probably sacrifice that Marsh Flats.
I mean, I feel like Todd might just be trying to set himself up for a position where he can Force of Will a key Terminus. But if you look at it from the other side of things, it's like, is that Terminus really going to go off if you Force of Will that Sensei's Divining top?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
At least they have more control over if they find Terminus. There's a chance that, you know, maybe he just finds Terminus naturally. You know, you force top and then he's like, oops, I turned over Terminus.
Right.
You know, the counterspell for that. So.
Yeah, but that can happen at any point, you know. I'm not sure if that's something you should really be super worried about. Like, play around it as best you can, of course, but.
It is a Stoneforge Mystic. Time to go searching for Anderson. Will it be Batterskull? It looks like it will be, and it is. So the powerful living weapon is in Todd's hand right now. Dan is going to maybe spin top. Yes, he will, with the plane. So he will take a look at the top 3 cards, organize them, draw, picks up a copy of Swords to Plowshares. Chances are he will fire that off to get the Mystic off the table. Yes, he will, or at least try to. As Todd again looks at that Force of Will. Will he defend over this?
I don't know. From Todd's point of view, it's hard to justify not forcing the top, yet trying to aggressively force the Swords to Plowshares, especially when Todd's hand has things like another Brainstorm. You know, he should be able to find more threats.
The pause there from Todd as he did consult his hand with the swords in the stack.
Yeah.
A little bit of a giveaway. I mean, you know,
a little bit,
there's 2 ways to look at it, right?
Yeah, that could be like the slight pause that you give because you know that Dan is a very accomplished player. He's used to playing high-level Magic. He had a very, very good run on like the Grand Prix circuit where he just cashed like almost everyone that he went to. You know, like this guy knows how to play, right? He's just been under the radar a while, but still Todd knows him from playing on the Open Series. And he knows that even just like a slight pause, like Dan might pick up on that. And I'm not sure if that's one of those things where it was intentional or if Todd actually had to stop and think about it. And I think he did, you know.
Dan going to sacrifice a Scalding Tarn here. Did not like the top 3 cards, so he will search out a land. We'll see if it's a basic or a non, and it will be a basic island and probably spin the top again here.
Yeah, one of the great things about this Miracles deck is that most games play out in such a way that your mana base is immune to Wasteland.
Yeah.
And while Deathblade typically only has 2 Wastelands, it's still worth it to fetch in that regard. You know, like you just fetch in such a way that their Wastelands they just tap for colorless, and that's it.
That's actually one of the things I really, really like about Miracles is just that you are a Wasteland-proof deck.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Right.
You know?
I mean, there are certainly some games where you naturally draw the Tundra or Volcanic Island or whatever, and Wasteland gets you, but those games are few and far between.
Musser will just pass the turn back. No land to play. Todd's going to sacrifice the marsh flats on his upkeep. Go down to 19. Search up a land here. His will certainly be a non-basic, as this deck is full of them. Goes and grabs a Tundra.
He, in fact, does not have any basics, period.
Don't need any.
Well, your 3 colors, lightly splashing a 4th from Deathrite Shaman.
Take a draw. Will Anderson. Again, Batterskull in the grip. He does have, it looks like 2 Force Wills, Snapcaster Mage. You see the True Name Nemesis he's picked up for the turn. Also has a copy of Council's Judgment over there. Doesn't have very many lands, but we will see if he looks to deploy something right now or not. He will go the Snapcaster Mage. I want to take a look, see what's down there. Brainstorm, Ponder. Good choices here for Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, Todd spent the first couple turns sculpting his hand, making sure that he had enough threats, but now it looks like this game is going a little longer, probably than he had hoped, right? So now he's actually kind of in the reverse situation where he's like, well, now I kind of have to ponder for lands.
That's what he's going to try to do. You see a Wasteland, looks like a Flooded Strand and a Source of Plowshares. He will draw that Flooded Strand, put that into play. Quick keep with the Ponder. Needed lands, found them.
Yep.
Might sacrifice that Flooded Strand like before he draws, because he doesn't really care about the Wasteland. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he just wants a 5th land.
Yep, there's potential for that.
Yeah, that enables him to hardcast Batterskull if he wants to. Also, hardcast a Force of Will, not have to pitch another blue card if he happens to get into a situation where he just happens to have the mana open.
Todd taking a look at the graveyard over there. Of course, when you're playing against Miracles, you always have to be fearful of Terminus, Entreat the Angels as well.
Yeah.
Musser going to spin. Todd going to sack in response, it looks like, yes. Yep, so he's going to search this out and then let Dan resolve his spinning of the top. Dan going to take a little look here, set things up, and then move forward accordingly. Yeah, nothing short about this matchup. Games do not end fast here.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, Todd wants the game to end relatively quickly.
Yeah.
You know, like, you got to imagine from Todd's seat, he feels like the pressure is on because the longer the game goes, the worse it gets for him. And then, like, the more cards you let Dan see with Sensei's Divining Top every turn, it just gets worse and worse and worse for him. And then Dan should eventually be able to build, like, this kind of unbeatable end game where he has, like, a Terminus floating. He has Entreat the Angels if he wants it. Maybe he's going to set up behind, like, a Counterbalance, behind a Jace, what have you.
I think we might have our first fight here. You saw Dan cast the Brainstorm, put 2 cards back, draw, play Counterbalance. Counterbalance goes on the stack. Todd says, I don't want that to resolve. He'll cast Force of Will, removing True Name Nemesis. Dan has a Force of Will and a blue card in his hand. Will he fight back, or is he okay with this exchange? We're going to find out. He's definitely giving it some thought.
Yeah, I mean, Counterbalance is generally pretty good against the Deathblade deck. You know, their deck is full of cheap spells, both, you know, like instant sorceries, creatures. But it is possible that maybe Dan just wants the Counterbalance to be a Hymn to Turok, but you do see that this is worth fighting over. And I think the fact that Counterbalance blanks so many cards in Todd's deck that it is worth fighting over.
Todd's going to activate Deathrite Shaman. He's going to remove Source of Plowshares from the graveyard. So Musser's going to take 2, but Counterbalance is in. Anderson will untap. Again, has Batterskull in his hand, has a bunch of blue cards, but not a Force of Will. See a Council's Judgment over there as well. Polluted Delta is the draw for the turn. And Judgment is a way to get that Counterbalance off of the table, as long as Musser doesn't have a 3.
Yeah, and generally these decks don't have a lot of 3s. They have some, but it's normally like in the 5 range.
Yeah, there's a, wow, Musser's playing something very close to Joe. I don't know if it's the exact 75, but 3 Vendilions, which Joe has been playing for a while. So there's 3 3s, and then 2 Entreat the Angels. So there are 5 3s here.
There you go, nailed it.
And Musser also has the Snapcaster Mage and the Fencer. So that's how you know he's very close to what the set has been doing very well with. Musser going to put the Counterbalance trigger on the stack here with Council's Judgment. Going to spin the top. Take a look, try to find a 3. I think Vendilion Click is the card he found. You also see a Terminus and a Mountain there, so it's a pretty good clean living there.
Yeah, as far as cards to Counterbalance into, those are 3 of the best ones.
Yep.
Or top into, rather.
A Delta comes down, an attack here for 2 from Snapcaster Mage. It's going to put Musser down to 14. Deathrite Shaman's going to remove a card right away, so there goes the Brainstorm. Todd will pass the turn back. Dan's going to spin the top because it might be time to set up a Terminus now. He's going to shuffle him around there, try to hide some information, but I have a feeling he's going to leave Terminus on top of his deck and clear these little guys up.
Yeah.
So I'll leave the board clear. Again, Todd knows that Dan has an Vendilion Clique on top of his deck, so 3-mana spells aren't going to work right now.
Right.
But he can also clear things up with the Flooded Strand to try to counter a 1 or a 2 if his deck cooperates. So, you know, you can kind of feel, you know, the walls are closing in a little bit on Todd as far as resolving spells goes.
Yeah, the noose is tightening. Once you get that first free card off a Counterbalance, it basically pays for itself. And then you get the Terminus to reset the board, and it's going to be very difficult for Todd to form any sort of offense after this.
There's a Polluted Delta. Going to try to slide a Batterskull in, put Counterbalance on the stack. Dan will spin the top. Again, he knows a couple of these cards. Spell Pierce was one of them, so good go get that.
Yeah, and that's great too, just because Todd has a Spell Pierce that, you know, he could use if Dan had 1 less mana, but since the top is on top, like, he still couldn't even do that, you know? Like, even here, he could, like, Pierce to try and shuffle, make him shuffle with the Flooded Strand or whatever, but it's just not going to work.
Yep. Top comes directly back into play. Todd knows the interaction. Some people might be wondering, why didn't he pierce the Pierce to make him shuffle it away? Well, there's a top on top of his deck.
Yeah.
So the Counterbalance trigger will go on the stack for the Spell Pierce. Musser will reveal the top. That's a 1-mana spell. That gets countered. Nothing gets accomplished. And now all Todd can do is pass the turn.
And just wait for Dan to set up some sort of kill condition.
Yep.
And it's like, he knows the Vendillion's on top too, and you know, Dan could draw that and try and put a clock on Todd, but at this point, it's almost better to just sculpt your hand and make sure you have some resistance. Keep that 3-mana thing floating, so at least you know that, like, all 3-mana things are locked down if Todd wants to play a True Name Nemesis or anything.
He's under no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. He has all the time in the world, and that's what's so brutal about this Miracles deck.
Counterbalance trigger is going to be placed on the stack for Brainstorm, and Musser says that's fine. Musser knows some of the cards on top of his deck, so he has no interest in spinning. Because why counter the Brainstorm? You can counter the things that come after it.
Yeah, yeah. If you're in Dan's spot, you got to feel like Todd is trying to bait him into using the top, and then maybe Todd can resolve something else, like a 2 or 3-mana spell.
Polluted Delta, we get sacrificed here. Todd will search up a land. He's considering the Tropical Island, but he's going to go with the Underground Sea. Yeah,
Tropical Island mainly used to just gain life with Deathrite Shaman, but that's not going to be of much use here, so.
I know when Todd used to play Esper Deathblade, you know, last year, he had access to Abrupt Decays in his deck. I don't know if he's still kind of rocking that.
He has 2 in the sideboard.
Okay.
And I know this is basically Brad Nelson's deck, like his deck list. He made this or tuned it, and those decays are there specifically for this matchup.
Makes sense. Musser going to spin here. Snapcaster Mage on the stack. So we'll see if he finds a 2, or if he wants to maybe sacrifice that Flooded Strand and really have a little bit of a battle over this. Again, Dan looking at a Brainstorm as the only card in his hand. So Snapcaster Mage is going to resolve. Brainstorm is going to get recast. That's going to resolve. Musser has no interest in countering it the first time, so he won't counter it this time either. So I almost gave the info away. He made that look smooth.
Yeah, he did.
That's what that was.
Shocker, I am putting back 1-mana spells with my Brainstorm when you have top and Counterbalance in play.
Yeah,
like,
my Spell Pierce is going back, man. Drew a copy of Thoughtseize this turn. What do you think right now? This turn, you know, you see Todd's hand, you see a Thoughtseize over there, he's stacking Snapcaster Mage, Musser's at 12, clock's at about, you know, we're working our way towards about 36 minutes left in the match. What do you think Todd's chances of winning this particular game are?
Todd has a last-ditch effort now that these 2 Brainstorms have resolved.
Okay.
He's found a Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is a legitimate threat against this Miracles deck. So now he's able to play Thoughtseize, hope that Dan does something, maybe put his top on top. Like, Dan might not want to lose his Brainstorm just because that allows him to set up things later, like if he ends up drawing a 3-mana spell or another 1-mana spell, what have you, like he's able to put those things back on top of his deck and use those to counter whatever Todd plays. So
Todd's still got a chance here.
Todd has a chance. He can Thoughtseize. If Dan puts the top on top, then he can play a Jace, and then Dan basically has like no way to find a way to deal with that Jace immediately. He's going to have a few turns, but also if this Jace resolves, he can potentially Fate Seal away the top.
This turn's getting very interesting now. So what Musser did is he said, all right, activate top. He said spin top,
response.
Respond, draw card.
Yeah.
So draw resolves first. And then the look resolves, but the look is still on the stack. So Todd says, with the look on the stack, I'm going to cast Vendilion Click. And Dan says, all right, in response to that, with Counterbalance trigger on the stack, I'm going to cast Brainstorm. So we got to clear ourselves a stack here in just a moment.
Yeah, so now what's going to happen is Dan will likely put back the Vendilion Click that he drew to counter the Vendilion Click. Then the top is going to resolve, and he'll be able to put the top back on top to counter the Thoughtseize. So since Musser had the Brainstorm, this turn is going to work out pretty favorable for him. And I don't know. I think Todd was just like trying to take that opportunity to resolve the Vendilion Click, not knowing that Dan had the Brainstorm to reorganize the cards on top, basically.
Yeah, what was that one card that was left in his hand? It could be a couple different things, honestly.
Yeah, it really could.
Terminus and Treat, you know, something that he really can't cast at this point. So now this is going to be on the stack. There's Vendilion Click. Now the look resolves with the top from earlier. So now we put these 3 cards back the way we want to. And in Musser's hand now is a Jace, so Musser is going to set up things the way that he wants them. Vendilion Click's going to go back in some sort of order there. Other cards are a bit of a mystery. Now he'll turn over the Sensei's Divining Top. That's going to take care of the Thoughtseize. So everything Todd tried to accomplish there did not work. Caracas will come down. Dan Musser will untap. Good sequencing there from him.
Dan knows how to play his deck. And this deck has a lot of tricksy interactions like that.
Mountain into top. Musser's last card is Jace. Don't know if he wants to try to resolve this, if there's any fear of Spell Pierce, because then he might have to put his top back on top of his deck. Wouldn't feel maybe great in that situation.
Yeah, and then he gives Todd another turn where he knows exactly what spells he can and cannot resolve.
So here comes Jace. He says, let's get the Mind Sculptor in play. Todd is going to cast Spell Pierce. And I actually kind of like this.
From Todd's side?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because he wants to try to create a window where he can get his Jace into play.
Right.
And the window is like getting super small. And I think next turn is like the only chance he's going to get to do it.
Yeah.
So he's got to take the opportunity to do it, I think.
Yep. The options here are put top on top for Dan, or sacrifice his fetch land and shuffle and pay for the Spell Pierce. And in basically both of those situations, he's pretty likely to resolve the Jace. If he puts the top on top to counter the Spell Pierce, he still has a Brainstorm from Jace to try and set things up, so he can like Brainstorm back into the top.
Now Jace is going to resolve. Now how does he want to use it? He's going to Brainstorm. Okay. Knowing that his Jace won't die from the attack with Snapcaster Mage. And I was actually kind of curious about how he wanted to go about using the Jace this turn, because it's very easy for him to leave the top on top of his deck. Todd resolves his Jace, and then says Fate Seal your top, put it on the bottom.
Yeah.
But that situation's not going to happen. So Todd goes after this, puts it down to 1, and now here's Todd's Jace. So now it's a little Jace on Jace action.
Yeah, and now Dan's in a spot where he knows the top cards of his deck. They don't cost 4 mana. So if he wants any hope of trying to counter Todd's Jace, he's going to have to crack that fetch land, look at the top 3, and hope that the appropriate spell is there. Either a Force of Will that he can draw with the top, if his card in hand is a blue card, which I think it is, or just another copy of Jace to counter with Counterbalance.
Fetch lands are certainly something that in this deck you value very highly.
Yeah, you basically don't crack those until the last possible moment.
Musser going to give himself a Tundra. Goes down to 9 to do so. Wants to stop this from coming into play, so he's going to have to spin a top and try to find a 4. There are even less of those in the deck. There are 3 Jace the Mind Sculptors, and 2 of them are, or excuse me, 1 of them is in play, so 2 are left.
Yeah, 3 mana spells are relatively common in Legacy. 4 mana spells, not so much, aside from Jace. But we see 3 spicy ones from Dan.
Bingo. That is a Jace. That'll take care of that.
And at this point, I think Todd is safe to concede.
I was gonna ask you that question. Is it time to pack it up? Because look, Musser plays Miracles. His pace is perfectly fine.
It is, yeah.
But it takes a while to beat this deck, because you, as a player playing against Miracles, have to think about so many things that it might be reasonable to say, all right, look, like, there is a world where maybe I could win this game.
Yeah.
That world exists. How likely is it? Probably not very high. And with Abrupt Decays in the sideboard, sure, there are only 2. But I mean, you get a fresh start at the game.
Yeah, I mean, he also has things like Pithing Needle, Meddling Mage. Like, he has a lot of good sideboard cards against this deck. So I think it is in Todd's best interest to try and win games 2 and 3 and just consider this game a lost cause.
Yeah, I don't know how many more turns he wants to play is the question. Gonna spin a top here, Will Musser. He found a Swords to Plowshares. I don't know if he has any interest in like casting it because he knows he has another Jace. So like he can just let this one go and then play the other one.
The Jace also allows him to cast Force of Will whenever he needs to. So I think he's fine putting the shields down that turn.
And Todd conceded as soon as that died.
Todd was basically making like a last-ditch effort to do anything in that game, but it is still kind of tough. It's like even if Dan lets his Jace die, he still has another Jace waiting.
I think the concession there is appropriate.
Yeah, me too.
They'll have about 28 minutes to play 2 games. Things certainly change here, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about right now. You've got Todd's sideboard, in front of you.
So in the sideboard, we have 3 Meddling Mage, 2 Zealous Persecution, 2 Abrupt Decay, 1 Thoughtseize, 1 Force of Will, 1 Path to Exile, 1 Supreme Verdict, 2 Pithing Needle, 1 Sword of Feast and Famine, and 1 Jace the Mind Sculptor. And like I was saying earlier, Todd has a lot of great ways to just disrupt this deck and punish this deck further. So Meddling Mage is very powerful at stopping Terminus. Abrupt Decay, very powerful at breaking up Counterbalance. It cannot be countered, so even if you counterbalance it, it will not do anything. It is one of the cards that kind of fundamentally changed how Legacy operated, where Counterbalance was kind of a problem. This card just steps up, kills it, no fuss, no muss. An additional Thoughtseize, which is generally pretty good. Force of Will, which Todd may or may not want, and then Pithing Needle to stop Sensei's Divining Top. Sword of Feast and Famine is also a slight upgrade to Umezawa's Jit, and Jace the Mind Sculptor is another threat that is hard to counterbalance.
2 Red Elemental Blast, 2 Flusterstorm, and Pithing Needle, 2 Rest in Peace, Wear and Tear, Entreat the Angels, Council's Judgment, and is a Staticaster, a Venser Shaper Savant, a Supreme Verdict, a Misdirection, and a Keranos. Got a Storms.
Yeah, there's some spicy ones in that sideboard.
There is some spice here. Trying to predict what Musser's going to do here is a little bit difficult. My first question here is Red Elemental Blast. How do we like that effect in this matchup?
I mean, it kills Jace, first and foremost. It protects his spells, allows him to force them through Todd's counter magic. It depends on how high he thinks Todd is going to value things like True Name Nemesis, which is actually kind of difficult to deal with. Aside from Terminus, Swords to Plowshares doesn't do anything. Jace does very little, just kind of... It turns the True Name's attention over to it, but that's not really a good solution, right? Like, eventually you need to come up with something permanent, and if you end up having, like, a needle on top, it can be really difficult to set up that Terminus. So maybe you do want Pyroblast to stop those True Name Nemesises, but Todd's deck is pretty light on counter magic and pretty light on Jaces, and I think Dan knows that, and it's whether or not he thinks that Todd is going to keep in Force of Will, how highly he's going to value True Name Nemesis. If he knows that Todd has Meddling Mage in the sideboard, he might want additional answers, especially ones with different names.
Verdict seems pretty good here.
Yeah.
Kind of be able to reset things, an additional Wrath, because Meddling Mage, a lot of times, I feel like names Terminus. Like, there are definitely situations where that comes up.
Right.
And be able to clear things out. I mean, you do have blast effects and swords to get Meddling Mage off the table, but an additional Wrath to clean up like True Name Nemesis is probably pretty useful.
Yeah, I mean, it could lull Todd into a false sense of security, right, by having that Meddling Mage on Terminus, only to get wrecked by Supreme Verdict.
Dan with a very, very quick mulligan here. Todd looks like he's going to keep his 7, so... look at this sideboard just a little bit more here. Again, there's a Council's Judgment that can take care of, a bevy of things, equipment, True Nemesis, what have you. Keranos is a way to win, but that feels like it's more for the mirror than anything.
Yeah, I think that's just to have this thing that is difficult to remove and is good in slow and grindy matchups, and I don't think this is one of them. I think Todd is very much the beatdown deck here.
6 cards here for Dan. I don't see a basic. So this could be the kind of game that is stolen by Wasteland?
Yeah. Again, Todd only has 2 Wastelands.
It's an aggressive mulligan there from Dan, so he's not happy with those 6 cards. Down to 5 we go. The second game could be over before we know it. See if Anderson can capitalize on this. A Thoughtseize would be a great start, that's for sure.
Just like in Standard, man, you never want to mulligan to 6 against the guy with Thoughtseize, and you definitely don't want to mulligan to 5 against the guy with Thoughtseize.
2 lands. I mean, it's not the best hand I've ever seen. There's 3 lands adjacent and Entreat the Angels. It's probably good enough to keep. And here's a Needle. So I imagine that's naming Sensei's Divining Top, but we will get confirmation on that from our table spotter.
Todd could get frisky and name Flooded Strand.
In theory, he could get frisky. He's naming Top.
Yeah.
That would be the friskiest. Todd going to get a Stoneforge Mystic. You can see his pace of play is quite quick here. The reason for that, of course, is because he's got to win 2 games against Miracles in about 30 minutes, which is not easy to do.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Dan's pace is there too, honestly. You know, like, they were both shuffling up very fast. They both realized that it is in their best interest to play within a reasonable pace, probably faster than they're used to.
Absolutely. Sword of Feast and Famine is the weapon of choice. A Flooded Strand going to come down here for Musser. Todd says, may I draw? And Dan says, let me cut your deck, and now you may, and he will. Going to play a Creeping Tar Pit. Before passing the turn back, it looks like he does have a Thoughtseize, but he's going to hold off on that. So Sword is going to come in here probably at the end of turn, I assume. Musser's going to play a Tundra. And his hand's not great.
Yeah, and then he'll likely use Thoughtseize to make sure the coast is clear to equip and attack with that Stoneforge Mystic.
Doesn't want to get hit by swords or something like that.
Yeah, and that's just a huge tempo loss there if that happens.
Here's a Thoughtseize. Todd's going to see a hand double Jace and treat the Angels of Volcanic Island and a Tundra. So we'll see if he wants to take the Miracle Maker or one of those 2 Jaces.
Yeah, I think Dan's a ways off from casting Entreat. And now you just start picking apart his hand, and it is very likely that Jace comes down next turn and bounces Stoneforge Mystic, but if Todd has a 4th land, he still has that Creeping Tar Pit to hit the Jace, get it off the table, and then he can go after his hand again.
About another Thoughtseize.
Or just get all the Jaces.
Probably makes it a little easier. Now here's a Ponder. Sword looking real good this game.
Yeah, certainly.
Another Thoughtseize there too.
I did say it was a slight upgrade to Jit, but
yeah, this game is a major one. Not sure if Todd wants to shuffle or not. There's a Thoughtseize, looks like a Caracas, and the mystery card in the middle. Don't have a great look at it, so. He's definitely giving this a little bit of thought, and he is going to shuffle. So mystery card coming here, but he is pretty far ahead in this particular game.
Yeah, I think Todd wanted that 4th land just to take a commanding position on the game, but Caracas is not really the one you want, especially since Savannah Caracas does not activate Creeping Tar Pit.
Yep. There's a land. Musser picked up a copy of Red Elemental Blast, but he will just have to pass the turn back over to Anderson, who will draw a card. Looks like Deathrite Shaman is what he found. And he will deploy the Shaman. Of course, playing spells pre-combat before he hits with the sword, so he could actually make the most of his mana and untap it. So there goes the Red Blast. Time to untap everything. That's the Snapcaster Mage. Can target a Ponder if he'd like. And so what he did there is he played Snapcaster Mage. So he floated 2 mana, played Snapcaster Mage.
Yeah. Targets
Ponder, then he untaps his lands, and then he has the Ponder.
Yeah, I think the sequencing was a little sloppy there, where he resolved damage and then used the mana that he floated. I'm pretty sure mana doesn't go from like declare blockers to damage.
So he goes like in the same phase as hit you with the sword trigger, float the mana.
Okay, if he did it in the same phase, then that's fine. But if it looked like he did it a little bit before that, but yeah, sword is a little too much to overcome.
On the multi-5, yeah.
Yeah,
it certainly is. And that's why we're heading to a 3rd one pretty quicker. And you know, now they got plenty of time to play game 3.
Yeah, so you can probably afford to slow down your pace a little bit here.
Yeah, I think so. I understand why Todd was playing quickly there. Same thing can be said for Dan. And you know, Todd does play pretty quick.
He does,
things
yeah.
Considered.
And Dan does as well, especially for this deck, which is considered to be like the glacially slow control deck in Legacy. But his pace has been reasonable. It's just the deck does take a long time to kill sometimes.
Well, while these 2 players do shuffle up for what will likely be a very entertaining game number 3, we will talk about our double Open Series weekend that will be taking place September 27th and the 28th. Edison, New Jersey is where Patrick Sullivan and Matthias Hunt will bring you guys the coverage, but we do have an Open Series event taking place in Indianapolis as well. This is the first weekend that Cons of Tarkir is legal, so you've got the opportunity to make your mark on the weekend in one of 2 places. I know you write the Daily Digest column for Star City Games. There are a lot of standard decks I think people are going to be interested in seeing.
Yeah, give me some stuff to write about, people.
Yeah. So if you like Jerry's column, and I know a lot of people do, this will be 2 tournaments to draw from. If you're in the area, Indy or New Jersey, definitely hang out there. We'll have coverage of the New Jersey Open. I expect a very large attendance there in Edison. Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, I'll have my feet up somewhere, likely in Seattle. I don't know what I'll be doing, but I won't be working for once. That's for sure.
Lucky.
Yeah, it is lucky. I only have to work, you know, the entire month of October, November, and December instead. So I just have to work every weekend, all 3 of those months. So lucky me, lucky me. But if you guys are in the area those weekends, definitely come hang out.
You signed up for it, man. That's all I'm going to say.
Darn right I did.
You love your job.
And I would do it again.
Yeah, of course. Every weekend, in fact.
Yeah. But September, I have 3 weekends off.
How? How did that happen?
I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So any PTQs you can play in?
No, there aren't. There's a WMCQ that I don't have Planeswalkers points for.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm like 130 short. Musser's going to mulligan. You only need 500. That's how little I get to play now. 500 cannot be a lot.
500 over the course of a year.
Yeah, 500 cannot be a lot. I think I got like 300 from playing in Grand Prix Boston Worcester, and I played in the PTQ a couple weeks, or last weekend. I don't know how many that got me, though.
Well, that doesn't count. Like
Doesn't count?
Yeah, the cutoff ended a while ago.
Oh, yeah, then I'm cold.
No, you might be fine, actually. If you're looking at this year's total, I would go back and check again, because it's like the one that ended in 2014.
Don't tempt me.
I'm just saying, man. I'll be there. I could use a traveling buddy.
It's like across the country somewhere.
It's in Philly.
Dude, the market. I'm in.
Yeah, Terminal Market.
I'm in. I'll see you guys in Philly. Musser down to 5 again real fast. Whew. These are like snap mulligans. Just like, this hand sucks. This hand sucks. I'm out of here.
And really, Miracles is one of the decks that probably mulligans the fewest. It is a solid 2 colors. Its mana base is really good. You have things like Sensei's Divining Top and Brainstorm to fix your draws. But issues arise when you draw things like Terminus and Treat the Angels in your opening hand. And those cards are not castable very easily.
It's kind of the reason I like the version that I know Rock is running with Ponders in it.
Yeah.
Seems to do a pretty nice job of smoothing things out. You get to keep probably a wider range of hands with the thought that Ponder will, smooth me out or save me.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's good or bad.
It can be dangerous. That's certainly true.
2, 3, 4.
Well, it looks
5.
like Todd's on a 1-lander, so we might have a game here.
We could have a game. Let's see. Is it a Ponder or something? It's a Thoughtseize. Okay. It's a Counterbalance and a Vendilion Click. Todd keeping a bit of a sketcher, but does get to open up here with a Thoughtseize. I imagine he's got to take Counterbalance. I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
That card causes too much trouble.
With Todd having another Thoughtseize especially, I think you just take the 2-drop next turn, you take the 3-drop.
Volcanic Island draw, pass the turn back. Anderson draws a card. It's a Creeping Tar Pit. Here's a Thoughtseize. Give me that Vendilion Click. Thank you. Working with perfect information now. There's a Tar Pit. Pass it back over to Musser. Musser draws Swords to Plowshares. We'll play the Volcanic before kicking it back over to Anderson, who will draw a copy of True Nemesis. It's time to cast a Brainstorm. Dig a little deeper into the deck. A Tundra, a Flooded Strand. Life is good for Todd Anderson.
That might be the perfect 3. I mean, you could definitely see scenarios where Todd just brainstorms into 3 spells and just gets Brainstorm locked, gives Dan enough time to maybe draw out of this.
I don't know the likelihood of that, the numbers and stuff like that, but
right.
It's definitely something that could happen.
Yeah, realistically, like any white source was going to do it. Like the first Tundra when it came off the top, allowing him to shuffle with Stoneforge Mystic, that was probably enough.
Gonna get himself a Savannah. Gets the Stoneforge. He assumes it's resolving, and he's correct, it is. Time to go back to the sword? Absolutely.
We had so much fun the first time.
Hard to say no. Now, if you're Dan, like your best draw probably right now is Jace.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it even resolves. I think Todd has Force of Will.
He does have a Force of Will, and he could very easily try and protect this Stoneforge Mystic, but I like protecting himself against Dan potentially peeling Jace, right?
Marsh Flats off the top here for Todd. He will play that, deploy the True Name Nemesis. This will resolve. Todd says, you, Dan Musser. Dan gonna play an island, kick it back. Not sure if there's a way for Dan to come back into this one. Now, Todd is really operating on all cylinders.
Yeah, not only that, but he seems to have all the answers, too.
It's a Sword of Feast and Famine. Todd will pass it back. Musser will draw a card. Just sets it face down. Not sure if it's anything useful. Doesn't look like it. Kicks it back to Anderson. Anderson will draw. It's copying from Vendilion Click. Going to equip here. Going to bash there, in for 5. Musser with no answer. Anderson. Going to get to untap some lands here. Has Vendilion Click at the ready. You see the Abrupt Decay in his hand. Also has Forcible to protect himself against any nonsense. Musser will draw a card. Not very useful.
When was the last time you saw a Vendilion Click hit a Miracle with the trigger on the stack?
It's been a hot minute.
Yeah.
It's sweet, though. It's really sweet. Here is Vendilion Click. Take a look at the grip. Dan almost doesn't want to show him anything. Not sure if Dan has like a red blast here or not. Probably trying to figure out the best way he can get himself out of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, generally the backup plan in situations like these where you've had your hand shredded is just some Miracles.
Yep. Just hope to peel.
Yeah.
Just going to cast actual counter spell to get that off the table, which means he's got to discard his next card. Todd will untap, take a draw here. See the Council's Judgment in his hand. Going to sacrifice Marsh Flats very quickly. It means he's probably got a spell to cast main phase 1.
I feel like it might be time for the tar pit.
Oh, little beatdowns. Let's close this bad boy out. 3, 6, 7, 8. Put you to 4. Untap my lands. Get rid of that last card, which is Caracas. Todd's got 2 Forcibles. I think it's the old check mark, JT. I don't think there's any way out here.
Looks like it.
This is part of the reason that I like the concession in the first game. It was a little bit early. Yeah, there's force.
Don't care what it is.
Yeah,
Force it.
Literally any spell. It could be Abrupt Decay. Force it.
Yeah.
Todd Anderson is going to win this match over Dan Musser 2-1. Esper Deathblade gives Blue-White Red Miracles its second loss. But I actually, even though they didn't end up